It started with a little girl stumbling out of the prairie, half-starved, barely breathing. But by sunrise, 200 Comanche warriors would surround a quiet veteran's home, ready for war. What happened in the hours between would change everything they believed about mercy, loyalty, and what it means to do the right thing when the world expects you to look away. Welcome to Mixie Veteran Stories, where forgotten heroes finally get the spotlight they deserve. If you believe in honor, sacrifice, and stories that hit deep, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales like this one. Elias Grizz Monroe hadn't fired a weapon in years, not since he left the Marines. The desert had taken enough from him, blood, brothers, and a part of his soul he never quite got back. So he found peace in solitude, working a stretch of dusty land between Amarillo and nowhere. No family, no phone, just a battered pickup, some cattle, and a dog that barked at the wind like it owed him money. It was supposed to be another quiet morning, the kind where the Texas sun bakes the earth before your second cup of coffee, and the only thing you fight is a busted fence post. That's exactly what Grizz was doing when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a coyote limping through the heat haze, but when he looked again, he saw it was a child, a girl no more than 8 or 9, weaving through the grass like her legs weren't listening to her anymore. Her clothes were torn, the cloth faded but still showing hints of ceremonial beadwork. She was barefoot, and she was headed straight for his waterline. Grizz straightened slowly, every joint in his back crackling like dry twigs. He didn't move for his rifle, even though part of him told him he should. Around here, folks didn't exactly play nice with the local tribes. Old blood ran deep in Texas dirt. But Grizz wasn't like the others. Maybe it was the years of war. Maybe it was the loneliness, or maybe it was just the way her knees buckled when she got close enough for him to see her face. She was starving. He dropped his tools and walked toward her. Slow, open hands, low voice. No sudden moves. He'd seen what fear looked like in the eyes of young soldiers. And now he saw it again, in this girl's cracked lips and sunburnt cheeks. She spoke in a rapid flurry of Comanche, her hands gesturing to her mouth, then to the creek. Even without a translator, the message was painfully clear. She needed food, water, help, and fast. Grizz glanced toward the horizon, half expecting a father or brother to come charging through the sagebrush with a war cry and a tomahawk. But there was nothing, just wind and silence. His neighbors would have called the sheriff by now. They'd have said she was trespassing, maybe even dangerous. They wouldn't ask why a child was dying alone under the Texas sun. But Grizz, he wasn't like them. He stepped forward, knelt down, and scooped her up gently. She didn't fight, just curled into his chest like she'd already used up everything she had left. As he carried her back to his cabin, he didn't know her name, didn't know what tribe she came from. All he knew was this: she wasn't going to make it through the day without someone doing something. And for the first time in a long time, Grizz Monroe decided to be that someone. The cabin wasn't much. A single-room structure Grizz had built with his own hands, walls lined with old military blankets and the faint smell of pine soap and tobacco. It had no TV, no radio, just a wood stove that groaned in the mornings and a cot that creaked like it was alive. But to the girl in his arms, it was a fortress. Grizz laid her down gently on the worn-out recliner he called a chair and pulled the only clean blanket from his bed. She was so light, it felt like carrying smoke. Her eyes fluttered open and shut, not from sleep, but from the kind of exhaustion that lives in the bones. He moved quickly, heating up the leftover venison stew from the night before and tearing off a chunk of cornbread he'd baked that morning. The moment the smell reached her, she stirred again. Her lips parted, a whisper of breath escaped. He didn't understand the words she spoke, but he didn't need to. Grizz handed her the bowl, and she ate with a hunger that was both painful and quiet, like even chewing took energy she didn't have. As she ate, Grizz noticed something beneath the neckline of her tunic, a beaded necklace, frayed but beautiful. Red and white stones in a pattern he had only ever seen once. His breath caught. A week ago, old Joe Ramirez, the last Comanche trapper Grizz still traded with, had shown him a sketch drawn in dirt, the beadwork worn by the bloodline of Chief Thunder Elk. The chief's only daughter wore it on ceremonial hunts. Ramirez said she was special. protected, sacred. And this girl, she was wearing it. Grizz set the ladle down, slowly, carefully. His hand hovered above the stew pot like it had just found a grenade. If she was who he thought she was, he wasn't just feeding a lost child. He was harboring the daughter of the most powerful and unforgiving war chief this side of the Red River. And there was no way they weren't already looking for her. His instincts screamed at him to saddle his horse, ride to town, and turn her over to the authorities. That would be the smart move, the safe one. But looking at her now, her face smeared with stew, the blanket tucked to her chin, the necklace barely peeking through, Grizz felt something crack open in his chest. She trusted him. She had no reason to, but she did, so he stayed. As the girl drifted into sleep, Grizz tried to settle his own thoughts. But the silence didn't last. A sound from the ridge rolled down like thunder, the slow, rising beat of distant drums. At first he thought it was in his head, a memory maybe, but then he realized it was real, and it was getting louder. Before he could move, the crunch of hooves sounded on the gravel path outside. 3 riders. One was Cletus Hartley, the grizzled rancher from the East Fence. The second was Deputy Hank Morrison, son of Sheriff Morrison, who didn't take kindly to Comanche talk. The third was Reverend Josiah Thomas, the town preacher with more fire in his sermons than in his heart. Grizz stepped out before they could dismount, hoping to head them off. "Whatever it is," he said calmly, "say it quiet. I've got a child sleeping inside." "A child?" Cletus barked. "You mean that child?" Deputy Morrison's hand was already resting on the grip of his revolver. "We saw smoke signals an hour ago. Red pines, Comanche war code." "Someone's missing," Reverend Josiah added, voice grave. "Chief Thunder Elk's daughter. Vanished during a hunting trip 3 days ago. And that necklace, they say it's sacred." Grizz felt every word like ice crawling up his spine. "Is she in there, Grizz?" "Shh," the deputy asked. "Yes," Grizz replied simply. "She wandered onto my land, starving, nearly unconscious. I gave her food, that's all." Cletus cursed under his breath. "You realize what they'll think, don't you? That you stole her, that you're keeping her hostage." "I didn't lay a hand on her, Bordeaux," Grizz growled. "Doesn't matter," the deputy snapped. "Perception is what gets people killed. You know that." Reverend Josiah stepped forward, more gentle than the others. "What you did may have been decent, but to them, you touched something sacred. This doesn't end in a thank you note." The deputy mounted his horse again. "I'm riding back to town to warn them. But I'll give you this, you've got a head start. If you want any shot at surviving what's coming, you'd better return her to hear her people before they come take her themselves." "In the dark?" Grizz asked. "She can barely walk." "That's your problem now." The 3 men rode off in a blur of dust and doom. Grizz stood still for a long time, the prairie wind whispering through the grass like a warning. From inside, the girl shifted in her sleep, unaware of the war drums now echoing off the canyon walls. And as Grizz turned toward his cabin, one final thought gripped him. If they came tonight, there would be no second chances. The wind had changed. It no longer whispered. It howled, through the mesquite trees, over the dry hills, and straight into the bones of Elias Grizz Monroe. Inside his cabin, the little girl slept with a shallow, uneven rhythm. The food had brought her back from the edge, but not by much. Grizz sat by the door with an old Marine Corps issue flashlight, clicking it off and on with one hand and gripping the stock of his rusted shotgun with the other. Then the sound came. Not hoofbeats. Drums, low, rhythmic, endless. They rolled over the land like thunder caught in a heartbeat. Distant at first, then closer, then so near that the walls of the cabin seemed to pulse with each beat. Grizz stepped outside and saw them. At first they were shadows at the tree line, then shapes, then warriors. Row after row of mounted Comanche, faces painted, feathers swaying in the wind, weapons drawn but held with discipline. They moved in silence, no shouting, no fury, just resolve. They surrounded the cabin in a wide, perfect circle, 200 strong. At the front sat a man unlike any Grizz had ever seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, eyes that shimmered in the moonlight like steel. His hair was long and streaked with silver. His chest bore scars not from punishment, but honor, and his gaze was cold enough to stop a man's breath. Chief Thunder Elk. When he spoke, his voice cut clean through the Texas air. "White man," he said in English, slow and deliberate, "you have something that belongs to us. Send her out, now, and perhaps you will live to see the morning." Grizz didn't flinch, but his breath caught. Before he could respond, the cabin door creaked open behind him. The girl, Amaya, had woken. She stepped beside him, eyes wide, scanning the warriors. Then she saw him, her father. Her lips trembled. And then she ran, straight toward the chief, every weapon raised instantly, 200 bows drawn in one terrifying motion. But Thunder Elk lifted his hand. The weapons paused in midair. Amaya threw herself into his arms. Grizz expected relief, a father's joy. But the chief's face only darkened. He pulled back, examined her carefully. Her clothes, her hands, her eyes. She spoke rapidly in Comanche, pointing back toward the cabin, then toward Grizz. The warriors watched with stillness that felt like held breath. Finally, the chief stood and walked toward Grizz, every step measured, heavy with judgment. Grizz stood his ground. Thunder Elk stopped just outside striking distance, close enough that Grizz could see the lines of pain beneath the paint. "She says you fed her," the chief said coldly. "Gave her shelter." "I did." "She also says you saw the sacred beads around her neck. You knew who she was, yet you kept her." Grizz's throat tightened. "I was going to return her. She was too weak to travel. I waited for dawn. Or you thought to ransom her." "No," Grizz said firmly now. "She came to my fence, barely alive. I helped her because no one else would have." The silence was sharp. Behind the chief, a warrior stepped forward, young, furious, with fire painted across his cheeks. He pointed his spear at Grizz and shouted something in Comanche. Grizz didn't understand, but the fury in his voice didn't need translating. Chief Thunder Elk turned slightly. "This is Firecrow. He demands blood. He says any man who touches the chief's daughter must die." Grizz clenched his jaw. He could see the warriors behind Firecrow nodding. The circle was starting to ripple. One voice becoming many. A mob, even with discipline, is still a mob. Then Amaya ran forward again and did the unthinkable. She stepped between the two men. Then, in a burst of desperation and courage, she began to speak. Rapid, passionate, fierce. Grizz didn't know the words, but he knew the tone, the kind of voice that fights for life, for truth. Thunder Elk's expression shifted. So did Firecrow's. Anger to confusion, confusion to shame. Then the chief turned to Grizz. "She is telling them the whole truth. How you found her, fed her, gave her your own blanket. How you didn't even try to ask for anything in return." Amaya pointed at the chair she'd slept in, the bowl she ate from, then at Grizz's tiny framed photograph, still sitting by the bed. She said something softly. Thunder Elk looked down at the photo on a picture of a woman and a boy. Grizz spoke, his voice barely audible. "My son, he was about her age. Fever took him. Took his mother, too." Thunder Elk stared at the image for a long time. "You have known loss," he said. "That is why you helped her." Grizz nodded. Another silence fell. But this one was different. Heavy not with threat, but with possibility. "My warriors came for justice," Thunder Elk continued. "They will not accept only words. They expect punishment, or proof that justice was done." Grizz's chest went cold. "So, what happens now?" Before the chief could answer, Firecrow shouted again. A challenge. He walked toward Thunder Elk, spear raised. The tribe was splitting. Some warriors moved behind Firecrow. Others stayed behind the chief. Tension crackled like lightning on a dry plain. Then Amaya stepped forward a third time, and she shouted. Not in fear, not in anger, in command. She spoke like a leader. Her voice rang across the circle. She pointed to Firecrow, asked him something. Thunder Elk translated. She asks if he has children. More murmurs. She asked what he would want a stranger to do if his child was starving. Firecrow's spear dropped to his side. The crowd shifted again. Faces softened, eyes dropped, weapons lowered. Amaya kept speaking about kindness, about trust, about how punishing mercy would make them the same as those who killed without reason. She has turned a war party into a council, Thunder Elk said softly. But now you must prove her faith in you was not a mistake. Grizz nodded. How? Thunder Elk looked toward the hills. You will come with us, to our village. Stand before the elders. Let them judge. If you speak lies, they will know. But if your truth is strong, they may offer you something no white man has ever earned. Grizz looked down at Amaya. She held his hand, not because she needed him, but because she believed in him. That was all the answer he needed. The journey began under moonlight, silent and solemn. Grizz rode one of the Comanche horses, flanked by warriors who said nothing but watched at everything. Amaya sat just ahead of him, on Chief Thunder Elk's mount, her small frame wrapped in a ceremonial blanket someone had handed her after the standoff. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The trail they took wound through terrain Grizz had never seen before. Narrow canyons hidden by rock walls, brush so thick it swallowed sound, ancient riverbeds long since dried but still sacred. These were places the settlers never touched, never found, and if they had, they wouldn't have lived long enough to speak of them. Hours passed. At last they reached it, the Comanche village. Dozens of fires flickered like stars scattered across the earth, hides stretched over curved lodges. Children peeked from behind woven blankets. Elders sat in silence, already waiting in a wide circle near the largest fire pit at the village's center. Grizz's heart pounded. This was no welcoming. This was judgment. The moment his boots hit the dirt, all eyes fell on him. He wasn't just a white man. He was a white man who had touched the daughter of their chief. A warrior led him to the center of the circle. Thunder Elk stood to one side, Amaya to the other. 7 elders sat before him, each older than the last, their faces carved by wind and time. Their eyes didn't show hatred, but they didn't show mercy either. Just the weight of generations that had survived too much to be easily moved. Chief Thunder Elk spoke first, recounting the entire event in his native tongue. How his daughter had gone missing, how a stranger had been found with her. Then came Firecrow. Though he'd lowered his spear hours ago, his tone remained sharp. He questioned Grizz's intentions, warned of trickery, cautioned against weakness in the face of what could have been a kidnapping. Grizz couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, the doubt, the danger. He stood still, hands folded in front of him, refusing to flinch. Then Amaya stepped forward, again. But this time her voice was softer, measured, steady. She spoke for nearly 10 minutes without pause. Grizz could only watch the shifting expressions of the elders, some nodding, some scowling, others frozen in stone-like silence. When she finished, one of the elders, the oldest by far, his long white hair braided with the eagle feathers, leaned forward and asked her a single question. His voice barely more than a rasp, yet it silenced the entire village. Amaya answered without hesitation. Thunder Elk turned to Grizz. He asked if she truly believes you would do it again, the chief translated. If another Comanche child were lost, starving, helpless, would you still help, knowing it might cost you everything? Grizz looked at the elder, then at Amaya, and said simply, yes, every time. The elders conferred, not with raised voices, but with low murmurs, like the rumbling of distant thunder before a storm. Grizz didn't breathe. He knew men who'd faced enemy fire with less fear than he felt now. Because bullets were honest. This was soul deep. Finally, the white-haired elder stood, his knees cracked. His voice, when it came, had the gravity of mountains. Thunder Elk translated slowly. He says the spirits sent us a test tonight, not to see if we could fight, but to see if we could recognize a man who chose mercy over safety. Grizz felt his legs nearly give out, but the elder wasn't done. He says you will be allowed to return to your land, and more than that, you will be under our protection. Any Comanche who harms you or your property will answer to this council. Gasps spread through the warriors. Even Firecrow looked stunned. Grizz's mouth opened, then closed. I don't know what to say. There is one condition, Thunder Elk added. You must swear this before the fire. If ever again one of our people comes to you, hungry, lost, bleeding, you will show them the same kindness. Grizz didn't hesitate. I swear it. Then the smallest moment broke the heaviness. Amaya stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Grizz's waist. She looked up at him and for the first time spoke in broken English. Thank you for saving me. Now I save you. The circle of firelight flickered across her face, and for the first time in years, Elias Grizz Monroe felt something he'd forgotten he was capable of. Hope. The ride back was nothing like the ride in. This time, Grizz wasn't flanked by silent warriors with hands near their weapons. He was accompanied, honored even, riding at the front beside Chief Thunder Elk and Amaya, who clutched a small pouch of dried berries the elders had given her, swinging her legs happily from the saddle. They reached the edge of his property just as the sun cracked the horizon, washing the prairie in gold. The cabin still stood, untouched. The windmill still creaked, and in the distance, the cattle grazed as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Thunder Elk dismounted first, planting his spear in the soil just outside Grizz's fence. This land, he said, now bears the mark of peace. Grizz stepped down, too tired to speak, too full of something heavy and wordless to triumph. You may not be Comanche, the chief added, but you carry something that many of our own forget, the courage to show mercy when fear demands violence. Then he turned to go, but Amaya lingered. She ran back to Grizz, pressed something into his calloused hand, a string of red and white beads, nearly identical to the sacred ones she wore. For you, she said softly. Family now. She hugged him again, and then they were gone, disappearing into the rising light like ghosts leaving behind a legend. Time passed, as it always does. Grizz never spoke much about what happened that night. Not to the folks at the general store, not to the traveling preacher, not even to the kids who wandered too close to his fence. But word spread all the same. Stories have a way of doing that, even when no one tells them out loud. He never became famous, never wrote a memoir, never cashed in on the legend. Instead, he did what he always did. Woke up early, fixed fences, mended gear, watched the sky. But something shifted. Every year on the anniversary of that night, a rider would appear at dawn. Amaya, no longer a starving child but a proud woman of her people, would dismount at the same spot her father had once planted his spear. She would bring food, stories, news of her people, and together she and Grizz would share a quiet meal. No words were needed, just presence, just memory. And soon others came too. A wounded Comanche boy, arm broken during a fall, a young woman in labor whose midwife was too far to reach, an old man who simply wanted to see the man his granddaughter called the kind soldier. Each time Grizz answered the door, gave what he could, asked for nothing. His land became neutral ground, not by law, but by honor. When Grizz Monroe died at 73, it wasn't in violence or sickness or loneliness. It was in his sleep beneath the same worn blanket he'd once wrapped around a starving girl, with the red and white beads still hanging above his bed. At his funeral, the town expected a quiet affair. Maybe a few fellow veterans, a couple ranchers. But when they arrived, they found over 50 Comanche already there. Thunder Elk, now gray and slow, stood at the head of the line. And Amaya Ohano, now a tribal council member, translator, and peacekeeper, delivered the eulogy. He once fed a hungry child, she said simply, and in doing so, fed the roots of something far greater. They buried him under the tree behind his cabin. No headstone, just a carved wooden plank that read, "Sometimes it only takes one man to stop a war."